Hello and welcome to another edition of the Extreme Improv podcast chat show episode. So on today's show, I am joined by Sam Irving. How are you, Sam?
I'm very good. Thank you very much for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. So, Sam, can you tell us a little bit, who do you perform improv with currently?
So I perform currently with two groups that are based in Edinburgh and one that's based in London. I live in London, but moved down about 3 years ago from Edinburgh and was loath to cut ties with my Edinburgh-based improv groups, which were doing very well. So if anyone has heard of me, they'll have heard of the groups I perform with in Edinburgh, so namely Men with Coconuts and the Spontaneous Players, who perform Spontaneous Sherlock and Spontaneous Potter. And then currently in London, I'm performing with The Hero's Journey, which is an improvised high fantasy.
Oh, interesting. So if they're still based in Edinburgh, how often do you actually get to play with them?
Men with Coconuts, very infrequently, unfortunately. I do the Edinburgh Festival, obviously. I try and get up as often as I can. They're currently in Adelaide, which I'm obviously not in Adelaide right now. And then they're going to Prague, and I'm also not making it over to Prague. I suffer of being the only one who has a full-time non-acting and comedy-related job, so I'm a little bit more beholden to the 9 to 5 than the rest of the group. Spontaneous Players, I actually get to perform with a lot more often because in addition to them doing weekly shows in Edinburgh, which I don't join for because they're on a Thursday night, they do a lot of touring shows. So basically any time they're south of the border in England or Wales, I will join them for those shows. They'll drive down, I will get a train and meet them wherever they are performing, and then I'll get to do those shows. So that works out usually at least a couple of shows a month, as much as once a week or a couple of times a week if it's a busier period for touring.
Okay, perfect. And what was the London-based group you work with?
It's called The Hero's Journey. It started out as an original show cast through the Nursery Theatre back when there was a theatre space for the nursery. Currently it's Between Homes. An improvised high fantasy narrative show. We're currently not doing any regular shows with that, but we have a few shows in the pipeline as well. And we are meeting up and rehearsing quite often. We play Dungeons and Dragons together as well, because it kind of fits quite nicely with the show theme and genre, so we see a lot of each other even if we're not doing regular performances.
Okay, I will pick up on that then as a point of interest. So how does it play like a version of Dungeons and Dragons as a stage show, or is it just that it's fantasy?
To an extent. I mean, the more we do both things, the more it kind of blurs the line a little bit. I think all of the tropes and quirks of Dungeons and Dragons you find are drawn directly from high fantasy, from Lord of the Rings, from all of these classic fantasy novels, with a twist depending on who you're playing with. But I think that we're doing that same thing. So we've been doing a lot of looking at. We've been giving presentations to each other on different fantasy properties that we like, and drilling down into what are some of the tropes and the things that we see constantly throughout these? What are the character archetypes? And all of those things, I think, apply to Dungeons and Dragons as much as they do to doing a fantasy improv show.
Yeah. Do you have any element of dice rolling in it?
We don't know. I would love to do that, and I've seen a lot of people do that to varying degrees of success. But
I was going to say the only reason it kind of caught my interest is I did actually see a show last year. I won't say what it was, just because if what I say isn't the most flattering, it does kind of go on the slightly side of I don't know how successful it was, just because I'm not really a Dungeons and Dragons guy. But every so often they were rolling this dice, and the audience, some people were so incredibly into everything, and clearly they were initiated. But the rolling the dice thing, I was like, I can't see what they've rolled. I don't know what this means. Are they actually rolling the numbers they say, and what does that come to? And it's an interesting thing.
I think there's ways around that. I've seen not an improv show, but actually I know some people who do poetry, spoken word poetry, and two of them wrote a poem which is almost a kind of mix of D&D, choose your own adventure, and poetry. So they had points throughout the poem where they rolled a D20 and then decided whether it went in the good or bad direction for the hero of the poem. but they did that with a little kind of pencil camera, and it was broadcasting on a big projector at the back of the screen, the back of the stage rather. So you could absolutely see that what was being said was actually what had been rolled. But that's obviously a lot simpler because they'd effectively written two poems, which merged at points, but were going in good or bad directions throughout. So a little bit easier than trying to work the entire show.
Sounds a little bit like what was it? Bandersnatch, the Netflix Black Mirror. Yeah, branching stories. Sounds cool.
Yeah, branching stories, and then it kind of all comes to relatively a close ending. But yeah, no. So for our show, we it's a lot more of just it's called the hero's journey. It follows that kind of story spine hero's journey format of we have a protagonist and there's some sort of threat or villain and maybe a few story strands coming together at the end. And it normally finishes in a pub with a big tavern song, and it's a really fun show to do. But yeah, I think if we could bring in more of that air of Jeopardy with the dice, yeah, why not?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what kind of launching off point do you use? Do you take like an initial suggestion, or is it a title or something from the audience?
So for the Hero's Journey show, what we get from the audience is we get the name of the hero, we get the name of the kingdom that they live in or the village that they're from, and we get an unusual law or rule that is which is the norm in this kingdom. And that normally, as much as anything else, it just throws us under the bus a little bit. So, or you can never turn left, you can only turn right. So throughout the show, we're all desperately going, oh God, we can't turn left, we can't. So if we had to turn right, you have to turn right 3 times so you're facing left. And things like that. People like to watch us squirm and suffer on stage. So
they do. Why do you think that is? Because it is a thing where audiences, they love to see actors struggling.
I think I'll be honest, I think it's a big appeal of improv for a lot of people is they go because they think, oh, this will be a laugh, or it'll be fun to watch how people struggle with just improvising a show. And when I'm teaching improv, I often say to students, like the audience likes to think that they're smarter than you or better than you. And that's not a bad thing, but I think it's the reason that a lot of short form improv games work. Anything where there's some sort of rule set that needs to be followed, like ABC alphabet game or number of words, sit, stand, kneel, all of these limiting games or naive guessing games. It's a case of the audience thinking, oh, that clue was so obvious, or, oh, of course that's the next letter of the alphabet. But then obviously they're not the ones who are trying to also make an entertaining show at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And the interesting thing with that is when I'm teaching improv, I will always, because sometimes you can get performers on stage doing something to themselves is very clever and very thought out, but then the audience can't catch up with it. So on the flip side of it, from a performer perspective, I always tell other performers that we can't trust the audience to be smarter than us to understand what we're doing. So it kind of goes both ways.
Yeah, I think some people do improv, what I would call improv for improvisers. So it will be very very technically impressive, and there'll be some really good game going on and things, and any improvisers in the audience will be loving it and really appreciative. But that's not necessarily if you want your show to be accessible to the average member of public who's never done an improv class, you're employing a completely different skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Sam, I want to come back to some of the things you mentioned earlier. So you said that you're the only one, perhaps from your Edinburgh troops, that is more 9 to 5 and isn't like a full-time actor. So would you say you're an actor? Is improv just the thing you do? Where do you fall into acting and the profession, as it were?
So I would say that so I have a general 9 to 5 job because living in London is very expensive, much as it would be nice to live completely off performance. In terms of what I do creatively, all I really do now is improv. When I first started out, I got my start in theatre, youth theatre, student theatre at university. And then as I discovered improv became more of my creative outlet, and acting and scripted theatre became less. So the last scripted play I did was probably maybe 4 or 5 years ago. The only thing I've done since then that was scripted was I played a character on a podcast which was a scripted comedy podcast. So I was in 3 10-minute episodes of that. But other than that, even that was it was a novelty to have a script in front of me and go back to some of my older performance skills. But now I would say, improv is my big creative outlet, and I do make money off it. But I'm in a position now where the money I make from improv is a nice bonus, and it's not something I rely on to pay my bills and to pay my rent, which is quite nice.
Absolutely. So, when you say like at university or at college, whatever you said, where did you find your way into doing improv? Was it from that you discovered it, or elsewhere?
Yeah, it was. So I went to Edinburgh University, and Edinburgh University has the Improverts, which is the oldest student improv group in the UK.
Very interesting. I did not know that.
But yeah, going for about, I mean, it's over 30 years now. But I did not perform with the Improverts. But what did happen was, at the time when I kind of discovered improv, the Improverts were really the only, or one of 2 improv groups that were performing in Edinburgh year round. A lot of people are kind of surprised by that because they know with the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, there's so much art and theatre going on and so much improv going on. But actually, year round, when I started, there was no other groups other than Stu and Gary, who are a 2-prov that perform at the Edinburgh Stand Comedy Club, and they do a Sunday show, and they've been doing that for about 20 something years, and they started in the Improverts at Edinburgh University. So when I started, that was all that was really happening in Edinburgh. So I was going along to they had free workshops on a Saturday. Anyone could come along. You didn't have to have any experience, and it was kind of a way, I think, for them to get a feel for who they liked, so that when they were holding auditions, they could invite people who'd been to X number of workshops and had displayed a certain level of aptitude. But while I was going to those workshops, I actually met a couple of Americans who had done a lot of improv and then moved to Edinburgh and found that this was the only improv happening, and had decided that they were going to start something up. So 2 Americans and an English guy, and they started up a group called TBC Improv, to be continued, that became TBC Improv. And they invited me kind of from day one to come along, jam with them. We were meeting up in people's living rooms. Again, there was no real improv happening outside of the student scene. So we were performing in pub basements, which I still do on occasion. But at the time, that was really our only outlet. And we went for a few months, 6 months or so. And then we said, let's do a free show at the Edinburgh Fringe. And then from there, that kind of built the Edinburgh improv scene as it is today. It was a mix of people coming up through that group, maybe splitting off and starting their own group, or students who'd been taking courses from us as TBC Improv, and people kind of just finding through that a bit of a community, to the point where there's actually a really good little community in Edinburgh now.
Yeah. Okay, that's cool. Okay, and what would you say was what drew you to improv specifically?
I guess I like the creative freedom of improv, in the sense of, it's an experimental space. You're not beholden to the script and I was going to say direction. Obviously, many improv groups have great directors, but I guess I more mean in terms of the way that you do something in the moment. That's it. That's the way it was, and that's the way it shall be in people's memories. You're not coming off stage and going, "That was great," but tomorrow this line say like this.
Yeah.
So it's quite nice. The freedom of not having to memorize a script. I know it's a kind of a very a boring answer, but actually it is quite nice to not, to be able to, put on a fresh show without saying, okay, well, we're going to need 2 months of rehearsal and we need everyone off book by week 3.
Yeah.
It's nice to kind of create that. There's still obviously a lot of prep work and practice goes into improv, but it's not the same thing day in, day out. And I guess also in terms of performing, the immediate feedback loop of, if you say something in an improv show, straight away if the audience liked it. They're gonna laugh, they're gonna cheer, they're gonna clap at the end of a scene, and that is nice. That's nice, knowing as you're creating it whether it's good.
Yeah, absolutely. That is one of the things. Just from like my personal perspective, when I first got into doing acting at all, I very much wanted to do film. I was like, I want to do a film. If you do something on stage, then you have to keep doing it. If you do it on film, you do it once and it's there forever. And the thing I discovered, because that was my mindset into going into acting at all, is that doing things on stage, you could get the instant feedback. And especially with doing improv, the thing that appealed to me is that you could show off your creativity and your ideas and even to some degree your own personality, and you could get that instant feedback for it.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, I think I have a huge. I don't do stand up or sketch, but I have a huge amount of respect for people who do, because you're honing that set or those sketches over a period of months of doing it in front of different audiences in different places and keeping the bits that stick and reworking the bits that don't until you have this polished product. And that is incredibly daunting to me. But then I've spoken to people who only do scripted comedy and or scripted theatre, and they say exactly the same thing about, oh, I couldn't go up there with nothing planned. So I guess it's just a
Yeah,
different skill.
different things appeal to different people.
Yeah.
So let's come on to, you mentioned, was the other show Spontaneous Potter? Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit about that, just in case people do not know that one.
So Spontaneous Potter is definitely the biggest show that I perform with now. It is a completely improvised narrative Harry Potter fan fiction, effectively unlicensed, obviously. But
Yeah.
we get a written title from, in theory, every audience member, usually everyone who turns up vaguely on time, writes down Harry Potter and the blank, and then we will do the show depending on what our time slot is. If we've got an hour or an hour and a half or 2 hours, we will do a mix of short scenes you'd like to see type of performances. So we'll do a scene from that story based on that title, and then we'll do
Yeah.
one long narrative piece, usually in two halves with an interval. So we'll sometimes do a show with two intervals, sometimes a show with one interval, where we do short scenes and then the start of the narrative, then a break, and then the end of the narrative. So
Out of
that's
out of interest, has anyone ever, if you, because I should imagine when you start the show, you say we want Harry Potter and the blank. Has anyone ever actually given you Harry Potter and the blank?
I don't know if we've ever had that. We get a lot of people who can't follow instructions and will give us actual Harry Potter titles. So
So
a
you'll get
number
the
of times we'll be
Philosopher's
like
Stone.
Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets. Okay, well that one already exists. We don't want to do that one. We want to do something new.
Yeah.
Occasionally, because it's, I think written suggestions is interesting because it means that you get suggestions from all of the people who would not normally give suggestions, for better or worse. There's a degree of, you get some wonderful stuff that you think, if you were just asking for someone to shout something out, you probably wouldn't get it because there's more time to think about it. And some of maybe the less extroverted people might put in some wonderful stuff that you wouldn't hear otherwise. But you
Yeah.
also get that degree of hiding behind the veil of anonymity, and people will put down stuff which is a lot more offensive or risque
Yeah.
that you would not be willing to shout out in a room of 500 people. So
How long's this show been going?
the group's been performing together for I think 6 years now. Yeah, 6 years now. But originally we were just doing an improvised Sherlock Holmes show called Spontaneous Sherlock. And then about 3 years ago, we were asked by the comedy club we were performing at to pitch another improv show that would sell as well. And we thought, well, Harry Potter's the logical choice. And no one was really doing improvised Harry Potter in the UK at that point. There are a few other groups now, but when we started out, it was really just us. Or I think a few of the groups started around the same time that we did. I'm not saying that we were the first and people are jumping on coattails, but just
Yeah,
that
certainly.
it was a gap in the market. So yeah, we've been doing that for about 3 years now, and that has rapidly become the bigger of the two shows that we do. We still do the Sherlock show, the Edinburgh weekly shows that the rest of the group perform. They alternate doing a Harry Potter and a Sherlock Holmes week in, week out.
Yeah.
The touring shows, I would say it's probably 80% of our bookings are for the Harry Potter show. And the Sherlock shows we get tend to be a theatre that's already had us in to do the Harry Potter show and enjoyed it and want to get us back again to do a new show.
Okay. So one of the interesting things you mentioned with a show like this is you said about like totally unauthorized. So
Mm.
how do you manage something like that to make sure that it's not going to step on any toes? And likewise, have you ever heard anything back from anyone related to the books or the films or anything else that's in some way connected to like the J.K. Rowling stuff?
So we are very careful to make sure that everything is very much advertised as an unofficial show. All of the Facebook adverts that we do, all of our posters and flyers, everything says Spontaneous Potter is an unofficial show. It is not licensed. All rights reserved by Warner Brothers, J.K. Rowling, and her publishers. So that's the big thing because in terms of parody and fair use law in the UK, the biggest thing is it cannot be easily mistaken for an official show. So if we were ever taken to court, touch wood, and they said,
Yeah.
you said, look, this is infringing because people will think it's an official Harry Potter show. We can say, well, no, look, you can see on every single ticket website, social media post, everything. We always make it super clear. We know that we've not spoken directly to J.K. Rowling's team or Warner Brothers, but we know that they're definitely aware of the show and they have not complained about it.
That's good.
During the Edinburgh Fringe 2 years ago, J.K. Rowling came to see a different show in the same building that we were performing in. And we know they had to kind of sneak her in the back so that she wasn't mobbed by the 300 odd Harry Potter fans that were queuing up to see us. And so she definitely knows about it. And yeah, I've had friends and acquaintances of mine who are copyright lawyers by trade have seen the show and have said that we're very much in the clear in terms of how we advertise and how we perform the show.
Yeah, I was just thinking from that, you may be secretly getting J.K. Rowling come to watch just to jot down ideas for what she can.
I think we'd notice if she came in.
Well, if she's got like the dark glasses and baseball cap on and looks very inconspicuous, she might be there with a notepad, taking notes down for when Harry Potter 8 or 9 or whatever book she wants to put out next of the Fantastic Beasts or something.
Let's just say that I think that if she did ever see the show, she would absolutely hate it. We are very irreverent and not precious about the source material, and it is often the characters get into positions that they definitely wouldn't get into in an official book. Let's just say.
Okay, and so how does it work in terms of do you have a regular character you play? Is there usually one person that's Harry, for instance, or how does that work?
No, we don't plan any of that before we go on stage. Everyone plays every character in different shows. I think we probably all fall into habits of playing certain characters. Like everyone will have favorite characters, or if a character hasn't come up in a show, there'll be one that we usually pick up on and be like, oh, it'd be fun to bring that one in. But certainly, we've all played Harry, we've all played Ron, we've all played Dumbledore. We don't play to certain cast roles. We don't play to specific gender. It's completely open who wants to play what character.
Do you have a favorite character to play?
It's a good question. I love playing Dobby. I think it's probably my favorite character. That's maybe my go-to because he's just like this little squeaky voice maniac, and you can do so much. He completely doesn't understand social norms and what isn't acceptable. So you can get away with a lot more. If you came on as Harry Potter with just these completely mad ideas and like climbing on chairs and jumping out of windows and stuff, people would be a bit put off. But if you do it as Dobby, people are clapping and cheering. It's a lot of fun. But yeah, I think I mean, I love also having the variety of playing the different characters. We'll even play, we'll obviously play multiple characters in a show because we'll tend to have a cast of 4 people, sometimes 5. But playing this huge cast of characters that exist in the Harry Potter universe and fans do expect to see all of the usual suspects at least. So they will be expecting to see Harry, Ron, and Hermione, and most of the teachers, Hagrid. They'll be expecting Voldemort to come in. They'll be expecting there's probably say maybe 15 characters that you almost have to put in a show, or you'll have someone come up to you afterwards and say, "That was great, but where was Draco Malfoy?" So
yeah, certainly.
we will almost always end up playing multiple characters in the same scene, interacting with ourselves, and also completely new characters that don't exist in the canon as well.
Yeah.
So that's quite
Okay,
nice.
out of interest, have you seen The Cursed Child, and do you ever touch upon things from that, or is that too unseen by the general public to use yet?
I have seen it. I think of the cast, maybe at least half of us have seen it. We'll occasionally make a passing reference to the cursed child existing, but I don't. Rarely will the characters from that or anything come up, just because, as you say, people don't know it.
Yeah,
So that means A, the references aren't going to get as big a response, and B, we don't want to spoil it for anyone who might want to see it. We've
yeah,
given away a
exactly.
huge plot point.
Have you ever had someone who's felt that you've spoiled the books or films that hasn't seen them yet?
No, we even have a member of the cast who hasn't ever seen the films or read the books, and we call that
Actually,
out we call it out at the top of the show, and we say, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, Stu, who is with us tonight, has still never read any of the books or seen the films, and he's offered to, but we've told him no, it will be funnier if you don't. So his
wow.
entire Harry Potter knowledge is almost entirely built from the kind of smattering of stuff you get from just other pop culture referencing
Yeah,
it and doing shows with us. So he actually knows all of the characters. But I think if he ever read the books, he would be blown away by how different his image of
yeah.
these characters is to the one that actually exists in the books and the films.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, just because I'm someone that until about 3 years ago had never seen a Star Wars film all the way through. But having been doing improv, you constantly get Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader and things. And just because they're such, like, same with Harry Potter, they're such big characters and things, you basically know, okay, I'm going to put on a Darth Vader voice and say, no, I'm your father and stuff like this. And the audience will accept it enough. But it took me years before I actually had seen one.
Mm. Yeah, we found in terms of character names and the vague plot, he was actually, he had a decent idea, but you start throwing in characters that were only in one of the books, or the big thing we found was he didn't know what any of the spells did. So we would cast a spell and he would have no idea how to respond to that, because obviously we can't have an actual,
Yeah,
blast of invisible force coming out the end of our wands, which are made of chopsticks. So
amazing.
yeah, so we kind of had to a mix of just explaining as we did the spell what it was going to do, or just justifying why the spell didn't work when it was cast in his direction.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I feel like I'm actually moving backwards from the original. Like when you first said some things at the start of the podcast, you said various things. I feel like I've gone through them chronologically backwards. So,
Yeah,
if memory serves, was it the Men with Coconuts, the other
that's
group you
right.
mentioned? What
Yeah,
did,
member of
okay,
Coconuts.
what kind of show is that?
Men with Coconuts is it is usually a narrative long form show with musical elements. So we'll often do improvised musicals, but generally with a pretty loose structure. Sometimes we'll do it as a mono scene, sometimes as a montage. Um, so it's in the past we've also done short form, or a mix of short form and long form for shows as well, but it's a lot less structured than the genre narrative ones that we do, and a bit more just what we enjoy and what we find fun.
Okay. So where do you fall on? Do you do much short form still? Because most of what you've described is long form. Where do you fall on? Do you enjoy short form? Is it? I'm guessing you prefer long form. What's your thoughts?
I do enjoy short form. I don't do nearly as much short form as I would like to. Not through choice, just through what the shows that I've kind of found myself doing, which have gained a degree of success, have all been long form shows. But I got my start doing short form. And all of the improv I did for the first probably at least 4 years that I did improv was all short form. And then it's only since then that I've discovered long form, and I would say I probably do prefer doing long form, and I in terms of long form I prefer doing narrative long form, but I do still really enjoy short form every time I do it.
Yeah, yeah. What would you say is the most difficult thing for you in improv? What's the thing you still find a challenge, if anything?
I would say challenging thing for me in improv. Um, I think when I'm doing a show where I'm playing multiple characters and they're not existing characters, so it's easier with the Harry Potter show. But if I'm playing multiple characters in a show and they're all completely original, I sometimes will struggle to keep them distinct enough. So the voices might start different accents, different voices, but they might kind of merge halfway through. The physicality might start very different, but one of them drops. And I think that can be, it's confusing for me and it's confusing for my scene partners. I'd say that's the one thing that I still do struggle with. And probably also I probably don't do as much physical interaction with the environment as I should. I think all improvisers know the feeling of where you realize you've been talking on stage for 3 minutes and you haven't actually moved. You've just both been standing at the opposite sides of the stage, talking at each other.
Yeah.
So given that we have, even for our big genre shows, we have very, very minimal set. We just have chairs usually. We have to really challenge ourselves to interact with the environment and do big physical offers and establish a bit more of a space through our object work. So I think that's probably the two things that I still would say I'm not as good at as I would like to be.
Yeah, okay. That is very interesting when you say about like the physicality. It's on the show last week, on last week's episode, I was speaking to a performer and we were talking about the differences from when you're performing in different countries and things. And I commented that I'd done a show in Europe a couple of years ago, and although it was a entirely English speaking show and an English understanding audience, I quickly realised that the things that were going over best is as soon as I leant heavily on physicality because it was universal.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to, especially if you're doing short form, which I do an awful lot of, to be caught up in word games and dialogue and talking about things rather than doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can drill exercises till the cows come home, but you still have to just have that awareness on stage. And I think it's very easy to fall into the as you say, clever word games and vocal characterization, and realize that actually you've been standing leaning on the back of a chair or stirring an imaginary cup of tea and not actually done anything else. So yeah, I think that's the challenge that I find myself setting myself on a regular basis before a show. If anyone asks, "Oh, what do you want to achieve tonight?" I'll say, "Well, I'd like to play really nice, distinct characters and do some big physical offers and interact with the environment on the stage."
Okay, that's interesting. Is that like a pre-show ritual? Do you have any pre-show rituals or things that you always do to prepare yourself?
Um, I'd say it's something that's not one that we do every time, but with various groups and infrequently, it's something that will come up. Some people that I perform with really like to do it. They'll ask everyone like, "Oh, what's something that you would like to get out of tonight's show?" Because it just gives you a set goal in your head. I would say the one thing that we do before every show is that every performer will look every other performer in the eye and as sincerely as possible say, "I want to do a show with you." And that's just become kind of our mantra. The same way that a lot of groups will do a "got your back" or hands in, whatever. We'll do everyone will look each other in the eye and not being silly, not doing a character voice, whatever. Just say, "I want to do a show with you." And it's just a way to kind of check in, and it sets that precedent for making eye contact and engaging on stage as well.
Yeah, cool. So, do you have any particular aspirations for performing or improv? Do you want to keep doing improv? Would you like to get back to doing scripted stuff? Where do you sort of see see the shows you're doing or yourself developing over the next 5 years, say?
Honestly, I'd like to keep doing what I'm doing. If it continues on an upward trajectory, that's great. But particularly with the Spontaneous Potter show, we're averaging about a tour show a week in theatres, which are 200 to 500 seat theatres around the country. We can get more of those, bigger theatres, bigger crowds, more regular shows. I would not complain. I'd like to do a little bit more international performing. That's one thing that I find, because you have to balance how much time, again, with my job, how much time off work you're taking for
Have you done
improv
much
versus
international stuff yourself?
all I've done internationally is the Prague Fringe, and that was years and years ago. So a lot of groups that I perform with do regular international performances, but I don't go because I'm limited again in how much
Yeah.
holiday time I want to take. And I think if I took all of my holiday hours for improv shows, then my fiance would probably kill me. So
Does she perform at all?
no, we met doing student theatre, scripted acting work, but she is a very busy primary school teacher, so she doesn't do as much performance now, although she is
Yeah.
very good, and she's an absolute no to doing improv,
Oh,
which
really?
in a way I quite like because I know a lot of improvisers who date other improvisers and enjoy it, maybe do shows together, but for me, she's my lifeline to the real world. Um, she's my, I think if you can rapidly find yourself surrounded by only other improvisers, and then when you have to interact in a normal social situation, you realize you don't know how to do that anymore. So
Yeah.
she's my lifeline. Spending time with our friends, who I know through her and not through improv, is probably very valuable for me in the long term.
Yeah, no, I do sympathize. My girlfriend is she doesn't really have a performance background, but within a few months of us going out, uh, she likes to do travel, which I was getting into. And I was like, well, if I can get us into a festival, and it's just us out there, will you do the show with me? And she agreed, and I don't quite think she knew what she was getting herself in for, but but we've done it about 3 or 4 times now, and I think she does like it, but I don't think she'll always. I think she'd lean towards just a trip somewhere would be nice without having to book a show in there somewhere.
Yeah, I think so.
Cool, fantastic. Well, this has been great speaking to you, Sam. But let me just ask you: is there anything we haven't touched upon today, or is there anything you'd like to ask me, just so that I don't feel like we've skipped over stuff, just because time has flown by?
No, absolutely not. I will go on record as saying that for a long form improviser, I don't think the Herald is a good long form structure. But other than that, no, there's nothing else for me to add.
Can we just like go into that a little bit deeper, just because that
Of course,
is
I can't just say that and not back it up.
yeah. Okay, can give me your thoughts why?
I find the Herald to be unnecessarily limiting structure, and I find it to be alienating to a non-improv audience. It kind of goes back to what I was saying a bit before. I've seen good Heralds. I'm not saying that all Heralds are bad, and I've seen groups who consistently do good Heralds, but I would say that they are in the minority. And I think a lot of groups just do Heralds because it's the done thing, and I think
Yeah,
it's the done thing in the UK because it's the done thing in America. Um, but I think there's a bit more of a knowledge in America about what the Herald is and how it works, and their Herald nights are a bit more of a mainstay of American improv theatre.
yeah,
So I
absolutely.
think it's kind of been picked up here as, oh, let's do it because I want to do the Chicago style. I want to, it's
Well,
it's it's done.
it's a very interesting thing, which just since I've been doing these like I did quite a few interviews last year, but I really on this podcast I had to figure out one of my goals for the last 3 or 4 months was figuring out how I balance interview style episodes such as this one with more panel show style episodes and
Mm-hmm.
ones which are tutorial episodes. But it's something where I've ended up in the interview style episodes. Sorry, this is basically me just plugging the different types of show. If you're
Go
listening to this,
ahead.
please subscribe. Please subscribe. There's lots of different types of shows. But what I was going to say is it's one of the things that's come up several times that what an observation I've had is that for a lot of people out there who don't really know improv, don't really understand improv, they think improv is just one or two things. And I have commented that I think that it just takes greater education, that there can be more. Because for an awful lot of people, improv, the way you have to explain it is whose lines it anyway.
Yeah.
And the thing I've commented on is that a lot of people who think it's just, well, it's short scenes and stuff, is that when you think about it, an improv show and trying to explain that like what a short form show is probably more difficult than explaining what long form is. Long form is it's a play, or it could be a musical, but it's made up on the spot, and you can explain it fairly. That's a very basic explanation, but you have basically explained what long form is. Yet more people understand and have the perception that improv means whose lines it anyway, which is at the easiest a sketch show with different rules and games, and without explaining the individual rules and games, it's difficult to not make it very much more long-winded than that.
Yeah.
And I think that when you get a Harold, it's probably, and I perhaps someone can correct me, or you could correct me now, it's probably the first version of the long form that really became a thing. And just as the general public just thinks short form, that improv means whose lines it anyway, that long form means you need to do a Harold.
Yeah, I think there's a truth to that. I think it's, beyond that, I think it's the first long form format that a lot of improv students learn.
Yeah,
For better or worse. Again, I don't think that that's necessarily a good thing. Um, but I can see why it's good. It's kind of a good set of training wheels that help you learn certain rules about long form and how to format a show. But I think a lot of people perform it because they think it's the done thing. And actually, there's a lot more exciting formats to perform and watch out there. So,
yeah. And like the other thing that I've had in these conversations, which again is just food for thought, tell me if you disagree, is that just like there are different genres of music, or there are different sports, like you could say, today I'm going to do sports, and then you'll say, well, which sport? Is it tennis? Is it rugby? Is it hockey? Or so on and so forth. And if you said, well, today I'm going to play music, it's like, or you're going to play rock and roll or classical and so on and so forth. Improv is like sports, or it's like music. It's a term, and
yeah,
within that term there's many different formats, many different versions, many different styles. But I just don't think improv has caught up to the stage of sports or music, as an example, so people know the distinction between the different styles yet.
absolutely. And I think a lot of people, I will have people say to me, say, "Oh, I saw improv once and I didn't like it, so I'm not going to go again." And
Yeah,
I said that to me is like saying, "Oh, I went to the theater and I didn't enjoy the pantomime, so I'm never going to watch Shakespeare," or I
exactly.
didn't enjoy Shakespeare, so I'm never going to watch a pantomime. They're completely different things within this one umbrella term for the art form.
So what do you think can be done to educate people, to educate the general public? Because like you mentioned earlier, sometimes you can be doing improv for improvisers. How can we what can we do if we have a mission or an endeavor to try and make it so that we can grow the community, basically?
Getting people to watch shows, but then that in itself is the challenge that a lot of people have. But I think there's an increasing success in the UK for these long form improv shows. You know, Showstopper and Ostentatious being the two really standout success stories, obviously.
Mm.
But I'd like to think. I mean, Spontaneous Potter is getting up there, and then Bumper Blyton is doing really well. Murder She Didn't Write, Adventures of the Improvised Sherlock Holmes. There's a lot of these shows which I think a lot of people would not consider as classic improv, as short form whose line is it anyway style improv. And as these are going around the country and performing in these sold out theatre shows, it is educating people on what improv can be. And
Yeah, and
hopefully on the
the
back of
thing
that,
that's so
they'll say,
sorry,
I was just going to say, on the
no,
back
sorry.
of that, if they see this wonderful touring show that's really good and it blew them away, they might go on Google and search, okay, what's the improv happening in my local area?
Yeah, and the thing I was going to say, that I think within that you said what is kind of like the key is that sometimes you need something to capture people's interest. And within a lot of the shows you named there, when you take Ostentatious, it's a Jane Austen novel. When you take Spontaneous Potter, it's a Harry Potter. If you take Sherlock, it gives someone else that something they can relate to.
It's
And
unheard, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a hook in, and then it can be like, well, if I enjoyed the Harry Potter show, I like Sherlock. I perhaps know because there's been various Robert Downey Jr. and Benedict Cumberbatch versions.
Mm-hmm.
People like that as a character and as a story. It'll be like, well, let's see what this show is, and it was all improvised, and then the next time it'll be, it's another improvised, perhaps long form show, and they perhaps don't even know that it's a long form show, but it's another improvised play or musical.
Yeah, I think that's it, and that's what we always say is as our kind of goal for the genre shows is we want people to come because they like Harry Potter, but tell their friends because they enjoyed the improv.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
I'm happy if they come in because they love Harry Potter and they're huge Harry Potter fans and they have no interest in improv whatsoever, or even they dislike improv, but they're willing to give it a shot. So long as they enjoy the improv and they tell their friends about the improv, that's more important to us.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, Sam, this has been great speaking to you today. And again, I feel like it's flown by and we've just sort of scratched the surface on things. But where can we find you? Where can we find your shows? Are there websites, social media, things you want to give a plug to?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook's the biggest one. If you search the Spontaneous Players, Men with Coconuts on Facebook, you'll find those. Both have websites as well, menwithcoconuts.com and thespontaneousplayers.com, I believe. And the websites will have all tour dates for shows that are coming up as well. So yeah, we're also on Twitter, Instagram, all of these things, but that's Facebook tends to be where most of our stuff is listed and promoted.
Brilliant. So if you're listening to this now, guys, I would like you also to take a moment to check out Extreme Improv on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. If there's a social media channel that's not created yet and you're listening to this in the future, we'll probably be on it by then, so do check that out. Our website is www.extremeimprov.co.uk, and as I alluded to with my devious plugs earlier, we have several different podcasts that come out in a week. If you subscribe to the Extreme Improv podcast, you'll get all of the goodness that we do. But if you just like the interview style ones, that's the Extreme Improv chat show. We have the Skills show, which are more technical and tutorial based episodes, and we have Radio Rumble, which is the audio panel comedy show, which is kind of like a short form show but tailored towards audio. There's not much physicality goes on in that. So Sam, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be on.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it'd be great to have you back on again sometime.
I'd be delighted. Just let me know.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.